Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Hi, this is Jed Hall, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm an academic development consultant at the University of Leeds. You're joining us in Season 5 of our Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where we're diving into the effects of research impact on research culture and focusing on different topics to ensure those effects are positive. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Dr Briony Thomas. Briony is Associate Professor in Design Science, and her role is actually a joint appointment between the Schools of Design in the Arts and Humanities faculty and Mechanical Engineering in the Engineering and Physical Sciences faculty. Briony joined Leeds in 2004, initially just in the School of Design. She was then seconded to Mechanical Engineering in 2015 to lead the establishment of cross-disciplinary initiatives in shape-based design and manufacture before her current role started in 2019. Briony, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jed. Great to be with you.
Thanks for agreeing. It's great. But before we dive into the kind of nitty gritty about impact and all of that stuff, I heard you're a bit of an obsessive with pets and animals, and I'm a bit of a dog man myself. And sadly, I'm without one at the moment and desperately looking for one. So tell me a little bit more about pets and animals and their role in your life.
Well, yeah, pets always interesting in my family. Growing up, so we lived in the city centre, actually, just by the university. So not much space, but as a result, we'd have stick insects as pets and snails and all sorts of things. So yeah, you can imagine how crazy my house was. So yeah, because of continuing working at Leeds, I decided I wanted a break from the city. So we moved out to the countryside and I went full-blown country. So we lived on a farm. We got pet pigs. So cooney pigs, which are like a New Zealand dwarf version. They've got like long hair. So actually a bit like dogs. It was a bit like having dogs that lived outside. They'd come and lie with you and you could stroke them. And yeah, so we had pigs, chickens, there were sheep on the next field. So yeah, went full-blown country.
Excellent. And I believe there's still animals on your bucket list. So which ones are those?
Oh yeah, so I'd really like pygmy goats in the future. Yeah.
Pygmy goats, right?
Yeah,
so how little are those?
Well, they are actually quite small, but they're a bit like the pigs, loads of character. So goats are really, really naughty, and I quite fancy adding that dynamic into my family.
Excellent. So you're looking for the naughty final stage. Excellent. Right. I guess we probably better talk about impact, hadn't we? Although, being an animal person, I could talk about animals all day. So back last summer, you and your colleague, Dr. Morgan Herod from the School of Molecular and Cellular Biology, were successful in the university's Engage for Impact Awards in the Widening Perspectives category. And I've invited you today to talk about that project. So, Briony, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, that project, and your collaboration with Morgan?
Yeah, so the project really sat, at the intersection of art and science, which is, how we got me as kind of an arts background and a designer as the kind of arts lead, and then Morgan brought in science, and he's a virologist. But we actually had many more collaborators as well. It was a huge project, and it developed during the pandemic, actually. So from work that I was already doing in terms of, I was collaborating with another virologist, and we'd been looking at how we could design objects of viruses that we could use in education to show about virus sort of structure and function and what happens during the infection process. And so viruses is this dynamic shape, which is where it connects to my shape-based type research. So during the pandemic, it became really apparent that, obviously science communication was so important, but young people really weren't being communicated to. So with, talking about, kids school age, and I think at the time the British Science Association did a survey of young people, and that was sort of ages 16 to sort of 19, and it really highlighted that they were a group within the UK that really felt that scientists weren't relatable and weren't doing enough to reach them. So we sort of took our initiative and the work that we were doing, and developed it in partnership with teachers and with the children within their schools, working with a kind of seldom heard community. And we were looking at, how we could use arts-based and hands-on learning to engage children to talk about the science of what was happening in the pandemic at the time. So the academy trust we were working with was Batley Multi-Academy Trust, and we specifically worked with 4 schools within that trust. So Batley Girls, Field Lane, Batley Grammar and Upper Batley High. So across both primary and secondary schools. And so it was pupils sort of aged 7 to 13, so year groups 4 to 8, and then teachers that worked across both class teachers at primary and then the creative department and the science department in the secondary working together. So those were the schools, and then within the university we drew on the expertise from sort of the arts, virology and education as well. So my background, I've done a lot in sort of science visualization and STEAM education, as we call it, which is just the arts within STEM, and particularly looking at this object-based learning in science. And then with Morgan, his group, they study virus function and how viruses work as kind of nano machines, which is very cool from the kind of engineering side of what I do. And he looks at how viruses infect human cells and how they're transmitted and the immune response. And so we brought in Indira Banner as well from the School of Education. So she has a background in science education, and she was formerly a secondary school science teacher as well before she began her career in the university. And we had Shamila Anwar as well, who she actually works within the NIHR, so based at the university, but externally she does a lot of science communication work, and she specifically focuses on ethnically diverse communities and how we're communicating science to them.
So NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research here in the UK.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, just for international listeners, it's worthwhile expanding on. Acronyms just become part of language, don't they? And we just can't get away from them. It's so hard. So this obviously sounds like a really co-produced project. So can you describe kind of what was done that you describe as co-production in the way the project ran?
Yeah, so because we wanted to bring all that knowledge together to sort of create something specifically for the young people. It started off in the pandemic, everything was remote. So we approached a head teacher that I was given contact details for, actually, a head teacher of Batley Girls, and that's a specialist visual arts college. So we thought they may well be interested in this sort of work. And it started off, I sort of showed what we'd done. I showed some of the models and all the visuals, and so they could get a sense of how engaging it was potentially for their young people, and just said, this is what we do in the university. We're aware that, there's this challenge with communicating, with different communities, particularly with young people. What can we do to support you? So it really started off as a question of, how can we help you? What do your young people need? And so that the head teacher then cascaded sort of, the information down to teachers that he thought might be interested. And so we began those conversations in terms of, with the teachers, what do you feel would be of value to the young people? What could work within the school? How could we approach this? What do you want from us, and what do we feel we can give? And we ended up deciding that a sort of program of sort of 6 weeks of activities would work best within the school. So, rather than, one-off interventions, which wouldn't resonate as much and have a kind of a sort of a lasting impact, really, a program of activity that would happen across a term. So, across the summer term within the school. And the teachers really were able to give us a steer and identify some of the opportunities. So for the age groups we were working with, there's no science within the curriculum that focuses around microbiology, really very much about disease, about the immune system. So young people really didn't understand what was happening because they had no educational foundation of any of the things that were being talked about. So that came through as a kind of key opportunity. And one of the things we really wanted to also embed within the project was the voice of young people. So before we even started to work with the teachers to design what that program of activity might look like, we did a survey with the pupils that were going to be involved, and just a really open question of, if you could ask a scientist anything about what is happening in the pandemic, what would you ask? And so with all those responses, which, ranged from, very specific questions about masks to kind of things that, as a parent, I found, heartbreaking, about asking, how can I protect my family? What happens when you die? Things like that, from children age 7. We worked with the teachers to look at, okay, these are the key themes that are coming out. How do we feel that we can create a program that allows, within that context, both the children to have gained the science knowledge as sort of foundation of general knowledge, but also because of the circumstances and how there was still some remote learning and, bubbles in schools being closed. And just thinking of more the social environment and the experience that children were living through, how we could embed creative arts within that to allow reflection and exploration.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. So it really does sound like you didn't have a preconceived view of what this project might be, which is probably a really good definition of a co-produced project. But why is that so important in projects like this to avoid going in with that preconception?
I think it comes back to who holds knowledge and what knowledge is, what's legitimate knowledge. So within a university there's quite a preconceived idea about, knowledge and power structures and actually the way that you operate with communities and within that co-production is completely different. And I always say to the teachers, and I think it kind of surprises them even now, that I say, but you're the expert in this. It's not me. I'm completely being guided by you as somebody who's with those young people day to day, who works within this community. I'm not part of this community. You understand so much more about what's needed than me and what will work and how we need to be responsive to things. So, yeah, it was, responding to something that we thought we could help with, but actually it had to, specifically what that was, had to be identified through people within that community. So, yeah, making no assumptions about what was wanted or what was needed, and having them kind of lead on that was so valuable.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm interested in kind of, almost leadership of a co-production project. So I was kind of thinking, if I was a fly on the wall and I kind of was able to see the project all the way through from the kind of initial conversations in terms of what is it going to be, through to, the end of that term when all the program of activities were delivered. What would you say in terms of how almost the leadership, who was leading, and how that might have altered over time during the project?
Yeah, so I mentioned hierarchy before. I don't operate in a very hierarchical manner at all, which I think initially was a surprise to the schools, but also a surprise to some of my colleagues. And that's always interesting. When you're working across faculties, you get a sense of what the different cultures might be within different subject areas, different departments. It's always very interesting. But my view was always, we can't do any of this work without each other. None of this is going to work without all those sort of pieces to the jigsaw. And so my role was really to steer what we were doing, to manage the relationships was a huge part of what I spent my time on, and to keep sort of revisiting the value that we were bringing to all the partners. So that was a really important part of the initial discussions with the schools, was in terms of making sure that we were hitting on the value and the needs that they had from the project, and we were all really open about what our drivers were, so why we were doing this work and what we were hoping to get from it. And it's actually interesting because it didn't start as a research project, all this work. It actually started as a public engagement project, which I think actually helped that focus in terms of we were delivering something for other people, as opposed to, it wasn't a research project where we were wanting to get papers and the kind of more standard outputs. It was like, we're doing this we're doing something for our local community.
Yeah. So you talked about how you've hinted it may have moved in a more research direction. What caused that, almost that change of trajectory, or that's like bringing in of different practices?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are obviously drivers within the universities to, kind of the metrics and the performance indicators that we have to hit. But actually, it was this identification of the fact that this doesn't sit within, these topics don't sit within the curriculum. And actually, how we then frame what we're doing to be able to look at both being able to talk to policymakers in terms of this, we feel that this is an issue, and actually some of these subjects need to be taught lower down within the curriculum. It shouldn't be specialist science knowledge, but also the approach that we were using. So the combining of the arts and sciences and the value that brought in terms of both engaging with pupils that otherwise wouldn't be necessarily be that interested in science. So there was lots of different aspects that sort of pushed it more into a research agenda to be able to evidence sort of the impact in a rigorous way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's lovely how almost all of those agendas are coming together, and actually as they come together, it feels like they get out of the way, and just something valuable is then done. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, and are there places that people can find out more that we can put in the show notes, find out more about that project and your approach to it?
Yeah, so we've got the project is called Keeping It Real. So it's obviously very, very aimed towards young people in terms of, or everything to do with it, very kind of bright branding and relatable. So it's keepingitreal.education is the website, and we will shortly be having some published outputs as well from that, which will be available on the website. But all the models and animations, and we put things in augmented reality, all of that is available on the website.
Brilliant. And we'll make sure that's in the show notes if any of the listeners want to dive into that. So sort of final question, really. If I was a researcher who'd never gone and done a co-produced project, or if I was an external partner who was being approached to talk about a co-produced project, what advice would you give to those two individuals who were starting out on this journey?
Yeah, so I think openness about what your drivers are. Why do you want to do the project? What do you want to achieve from it, and kind of where the value lies for you is really important. An understanding of the importance of the communication and the time investment that it takes to develop the relationships is really critical. I think within academia, we're not necessarily as used to putting that amount of time into developing relationships outside of academia, but it's a kind of long-term investment, so it's really, really critical to how your project runs. But I think also, because I was going to say critical to project success, but actually an openness to failure as well, and that with these sorts of projects you don't always get things right the first time. So within our work with the schools, we used a kind of action research approach. So teachers would deliver something one week and we would get feedback from teachers and pupils in terms of what worked. Can you do this? Can you change this? Is this feasible? So we were constantly being responsive and kind of understood that we were not necessarily going to get it right first time. And I think so a lot of those things, that kind of openness of priorities, where the value sits for partners, the ways that partners work, what are the norms and what are the limitations of what they can offer, kind of just being really open about that and finding partners that want to invest in that kind of longer term relationship, because, these projects can just build and build. They kind of, I've experienced, they kind of take on a kind of life of their own. And so just that willingness for it not to be something that's necessarily short term, but investing in that longer term relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Briony, I could keep asking you questions around this project. Although I'm not a parent, my wife has been a head teacher for many years. She's no longer, but it does, and science is important to me, and impact is one of the most important things for me. So I could ask you loads and loads about this, and thank you so much for giving up your time today to have a chat about it, and hopefully we can continue the conversation at some point and I can learn some more from you. So thank you very much for coming along today, and if you'd like to say bye to the listeners, hopefully we can see each other again soon.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about this work more, Jed.
Brilliant. Thanks, Briony.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.